It's important that our final message of the week touches on a topic that affects us all, moving from sustainable strategy to transformation. Companies need to implement a fundamental shift in their ethos to adopt waste reduction in manufacturing to create products designed with recyclable materials and a plan to manage any of their elements that end up in a landfill. Engineers need to continue to adopt sustainability practices as technology and supply chains increase. Evaluating the impact of an innovation, not only what solutions it creates, but what parts of the manufacturing process could move sustainability forward. Hallie Neupert will be joined by panelists who are pushing sustainability practices past carbon goals to create truly innovative solutions for waste reduction and reclamation. She is a professor of management at the Oregon Institute of Technology in Klamath Falls, Oregon, where she also oversees Catalyze Klamath Challenge, supporting early-stage college inventors and entrepreneurs.
Hello, welcome to the Moving from Sustainable Strategy to Transformation panel. My name is Hallie Neupert, and I'm a professor at Oregon Institute of Technology. I'm excited to be your moderator today, and I'd like to introduce, or actually have my panelists introduce themselves to you. So let's start with Zoe Bezpalko.
Thank you, Hallie. So as mentioned, I work at Autodesk. I am a sustainability strategy manager specifically for the design and manufacturing industry. I kind of have two roles mainly. One is to position Autodesk technology and tools to respond to sustainability challenges. And two is to think about the future of our technology and what are the next generation of tools and features that we can build into Autodesk products to support sustainable design and manufacturing workflows.
Wonderful. And next I'd like to have Elias Stahl introduce himself.
Hi, thank you, Holly. And I'm Elias Stahl, the co-founder and CEO of Hilos. We're a Portland-based startup that is building the infrastructure for the circular economy, really powering on-demand product without inventory or waste. So we've created a platform that allows us, starting with footwear, to make product on demand, 72 hours click to ship, and really focused on creating a post-industrial supply chain for what we believe is the future of manufacturing.
Fantastic, thank you both. So I have a number of questions that I'm going to ask, and I'll just let either one of you that wants to jump in on this first one get us started. So one of the goals that Invent Oregon teams are working through is creating innovations that address sustainability. Like many organizations pursuing green tech, student teams often run into issues during prototyping that reveal areas of negative impact during manufacturing. What trends have you seen organizations taking on to provide sustainable solutions, but to also ensure their manufacturing process is low impact? Who would like to go first?
I'll start. I think something that is very important is that sustainability is not only what you make, but also how you make it. So, you know, the idea is like you can make great water filter for emerging country, but if you do it with toxic material, it's not great. So really thinking holistically, sustainability is not only just the new innovative green tech, but also how do you bring that to market? And you know, my role at Autodesk is to help organizations think how they can reduce their impact, and not only on the products that they make, but also the processes that they take. And in terms of processes, something important is that a lot of this process and the manufacturing process is actually defined at the design phase. There's actually data that shows that about 80% of environmental impact is embedded into the design phase, where you make decisions that have cascading impact. For instance, at the design phase, you want to choose the type of material you're going to put in your product, and the type of material is probably going to define the type of manufacturing that you're going to have to use. And this is kind of where the impact, that the negative environmental impact appears. So not, you know, maybe we can go into more details later into specific strategy to reduce environmental impact in manufacturing phases. But just to start, I think it's important to think about manufacturing right at the design phase and really thinking not only on what you do, but how you make it.
And I couldn't agree more with what Zoe's talking about when it comes to focusing on the design phase from the get-go. I think that providing some of our personal experience to the students in the audience that are thinking about ways to create new products, services that they want to be sustainable from the outset. it begins at the design phase, but what you're seeing constantly when you have a design, you have a product, and you want it made sustainably, you're getting told by a lot of different manufacturers or suppliers that they're going to manufacture using the same kind of traditional manufacturing method, mass manufacturing, but just substituting slightly more sustainable materials or slightly more sustainable processes or recapture of carbon at the end stream. And those all have more marginal impact than really redefining and reinventing the product from the beginning at the design phase. So I think what Zoe's saying is really gets to the heart of the matter. If you design a product so that it can be disassembled, if you design a product so that it uses less materials from the get-go, or that those materials are completely composite form, so you can take them and recycle them all together rather than having to worry about disassembling, then you have a completely different form of construction from the get-go. So that's something that a lot of times you asked, I think, about trends in the industry and where a lot of suppliers and manufacturers are trying to go. They're not going far enough. They're not going to the design phase. It's great to see that there are Autodesk and other companies that are moving there. But we faced the same challenges when we went building our own supply chain. We found a lot of traditional manufacturing that was still nibbling around the edges and not getting to the heart of the matter.
Great. It struck me, Zoe, in your introduction, you said that you both respond to kind of what's happened in the past, but also plan for the future, which it sounds a little bit like that's what you both are talking about. How would you characterize the way in which that shift is happening currently?
Specifically in the design process or in terms of like sustainability trends?
Yeah, sustainability trends and are corporations appreciating the need to move away from being reactive and start looking at some of those design elements and being more proactive?
Yeah, I think the past is definitely what Elias was mentioning around, just finding more recyclable material and switching from, switching material is kind of the old school strategy, or maybe local supply chain is another one. Where I'm seeing things moving forward is really companies starting thinking about what is the impact of their product into the world, and versus just as a company, my own personal impact. And I'm saying that because there's a large group of products that are all products that use energy. So being electronics, but also cars, that their largest environmental impact is actually in the use phase, how these products are being used. How do you drive your car? Where do you live? Where, is it an electric car? Where does the electric mix come from? And so forth. And I'm seeing a shift where more and more companies are thinking about this impact at, a scope 2 and a scope 3, and starting to tackle that. And that's kind of where the evolution, I think, is going generally, and both on a positive, kind of like a positive and a negative aspect. The negative being reducing the negative impact, but the more and more companies are seeing that the impact that they have is a competitive advantage in some cases, and so they can also leveraging by saying, "Hey, our products are bettering the life of X billion people," or so forth. So really a shift in kind of sustainability in companies is sort of like changing your lights or changing just the material to what is the larger impact I can have into the world.
Fantastic. Great. You want to add anything to that, Elias?
No, I mean, I agree with that trend overall. I think that there's an acceptance that a product can have more than one part of its value chain experienced in how it's being used. When you think of how do you define sustainability, it's really a matter of time scale. And companies used to be focused on make to buy as their time scale, and they would judge success and impact on that time scale. And now it's moving more towards sourcing all the way through to resourcing. And that's an incredible breadth of time scale, because you're worried about taking where you're getting materials that can be reused and reusing as much material as you can, and then providing some form of an upcycling or downcycling at the end of the value chain. And that provides a very different form of company, because at the end of the day, you're just a link in the chain, and you have to find markets downstream and upstream of whatever you're making into the world. And I think that provides a completely different lens with which to see design and the products you're creating.
Yeah, fantastic. Okay, Elias, maybe we'll start with you for this one. What are some methodologies that startups can implement to investigate their supply chain to seek out the more low impact resources while establishing sustainability practices?
Well, I'll give a very good example of one that we instituted from the get-go, and that's first just having a set of no's. Decide what you're going to do, what you're not going to do, and have a guiding light around how you want to build your company. For an example, we decided very early on that sustainability was going to be a core practice at Hilos. And so when we were looking at how we build our products on 3D printing technology, there are 3 main forms of 3D printing. There's DLP, digital light processing, there's SLS, powder bed base, and then there's FDM. And the problem with the first and the last are they're not really recyclable. Well, the FDM can be recyclable, but it's not very high performing. DLP, which is where Adidas and Carbon are moving with footwear, is not recyclable. And so we chose to base a cornerstone of our manufacturing supply chain based on recyclability. And it turned out to be a great call because we got materials that could outperform at price and performance what we saw in DLP, but we were guided initially by sustainability. So I think that's one. The other, I think the other thing I would say when it comes to investigating your supply chain, we've seen every brand and company that we talk to and work with has a 2030 net zero commitment. And they are moving increasingly towards what they call a regenerative supply chain. So what these large companies are doing in order to meet these very audacious goals that their board of directors are setting for them is rather than changing the fundamental design of their products, like Zoe discussed, they're sourcing a supply chain that is becoming regenerative, meaning that every time we cut down these many trees for the rubber in our outsoles, we're going to plant new trees and we'll take a hit on the margin or whatever it may be. And so they're still thinking very much in the same wheelhouse, but they're trying to create an ecosystem that is regenerative so that at the very, very upstream level of their material flow, they can say they have a net zero impact. And that's, given current I think given the current paradigm that they're thinking within, that's the best they can do. That's low risk. But the problem is that there's low risk, low reward, and there's a high risk, high reward kind of frame of mind when you think about supply chains. And big companies are moving towards regenerative supply chains because they don't want to fundamentally change the way they're designing and making product. And that has limitations on the overall impact of sustainability. So I would encourage anyone when they're looking at really building a supply chain from scratch or understanding who their supply chain partners are, to think of those that are looking in the old mindset of traditional manufacturing with a regenerative coating on top to those that actually fundamentally want to make on demand. They want to make completely circular. They want to create new forms of product and supply chains that can adapt to that in a truly resilient and sustainable way. And you'll always be able to determine the difference based on the means of manufacturing and the design that goes into it.
And just to build up on that, I think, to what you were just saying, Elias, like large organizations are all setting commitment towards sustainability and net zero. And most of these companies, particularly in the, consumer goods field, is their environmental impact is actually embedded into their supply chain, because most of the time they just assemble products that have been made somewhere else. And so their only solution to actually reach this net zero is to ask their supplier to be more sustainable. And so we are seeing another trend, which is kind of these sustainability guidelines starting trickling down from this corporation big commitment into the supply chain. So the good news there that even a startup entering the market should start seeing bubbling more and more, organization that have sustainability into at least their offering. I totally agree with you, Elias. There is work to do in terms of like discerning people doing, just a layer or coding of sustainability and greenwashing, that's those that have this as the core. But my point here is mostly like, as a new organization, just go and ask. More and more of these organizations now are used to have people and their clients, asking them about their sustainability commitment, what they are doing. They are used to report on these, and then this information go into rankings. And so there's actually a plethora online of different rankings of supply chains based on their sustainability and their impact. So, I would definitely recommend any organization, as you start building your supply chain like Elias did, go and refer to this guide and ask the right questions.
And building on that, because I think that's a really important point, how would you encourage someone to navigate? I mean, there's a thicket of different indices and rankings, some of which are, questionable, some of which aren't. I was astonished to know that, organic cotton actually takes more water to grow than more resources go into organic cotton than regular cotton, right? And so it's in some ways it's kind of
bioplastic takes more energy than regular plastic to make. There's always this
exactly. It's not. I feel like we're missing this. There's an article just the other day about how ESG funds. They've done a deep review on ESG funds, which is a form of understanding the environmental, social, and governance impacts of investments in a portfolio, and they've seen that they're invested in a coal plant, that they're invested in Saudi Aramco, right? There's a Chinese coal plant in an ESG top-rated fund. And so I'm wondering how we can do deeper diligence. And I've got a few ideas, but I would love to hear your opinion or your 2 cents on navigating that thicket.
I think it's really 2 cents, honestly, because, even Autodesk, we answer these rankings. Some of them is pay to play. Some of them are and some of them are very transparent about how they rank these organizations, and some are untransparent. So I would say, at least my 2 cents are go for non-for-profits and go for the one that has the most transparency as of their criteria for ranking these supply chain. But I'd love to hear your advice.
Yeah, I mean, I think I agree that most are pay for play. I think that there's a lot that are, lacking in rigor. I'll call everyone's attention. I'm going to call out another collaboration. Adidas and Allbirds launched a collaboration last week that was based entirely around the carbon footprint of a shoe, which is really interesting. I think it's a fantastic collaboration. It really shows the future of tech-based collaborations in the industry when 2 different competitors essentially come together around sharing technology for a more sustainable product. But their sustainability report was 4 pages and lacked a huge amount of information. And it also essentially admitted that all their shoes are going to be incinerated at the end of the day, 20% landfill, 80% incineration rate, right? So I think there was a lot farther to go. And I would just encourage everyone to read the reports and do their own due diligence. And then also look for a partner that's smarter than yourself. Where we did our own back of the envelope calculations, but we're working with Yale and really excited to partner with their Center for Industry and Ecology to come in and do a complete material flow analysis and an impact study on everything we built, because we're going to be far more credible and believe more in what we're doing when we have someone that is an external third party that doesn't have any financial incentive, like a ratings agency, to come in and really, I think, focus on and look at the entire path and impact of our supply chain. So to the extent that that's possible, obviously early days, not so much, but I think having a third party like that, maybe it's Oregon Tech, maybe it's the Portland, maybe it's PSU. I think there's a lot of academic institutions that have a focus on sustainability that can begin that work at the grassroots.
There's an aspect of information literacy that's kind of coming out here, which is something that we really encourage our students to grasp and embrace while they're students. What advice would you give to the student who wants to find themselves working for a company with a core value of sustainability or something along those lines? What should they look for as they're out there exploring job markets that would be an indicator of companies that do this well?
Well, I would say, first off, is there a sustainability report? Is there a chief sustainability officer? You can just see kind of how many resources a company is moving towards sustainability, and then read their annual report and actually read. Every company that is publicly traded has a 10K out there. You Google it, you get it and download it, and there is everything that a publicly traded company has to disclose. So there's a lot of information out there. And I think the best part, rather than looking at secondary sources, go to the primary sources and read through it yourself and get an understanding comparatively between a few companies, how serious they are. There's so much information out there that I think the trouble is more in filtering and vetting. And so going for primary sources and looking at these reports and understanding what resources and strategies these companies are taking that show they're materially committed to fundamental transformation. In many ways, you can look at the Chevron's recent investment in a brownfield as a fundamental strategic focus for sustainability as a core business strategy. So I think you can find a lot in those types of reports rather than just the surface level, marketing that's caught in a news cycle.
And I would just say, I when I mentor people, I said there are two roles in sustainability. You can go for a sustainability focused company. So it's maybe like coming back to my first comment, like what they make is inherently good for the world. So, I don't know, electric cars, solar panels, and so on. And then their sustainability role in more traditional companies. And this is what I'm doing today. I'm in the sustainability of a software company. We are building sustainability really into the DNA of our company now, but it's taking some time. So I would just say, like, keep in mind that, because that opens up the field in terms of what you can go and work for after that.
Great, thank you. Okay, so sustainability, excuse me, sustainability goes beyond recycling and reclaiming programs. How can new innovators shift their thinking to better consider practices that make impactful changes? And Zoe, do you want to start us off on this one?
Sure. I'll repeat a little bit what I said. I think it's important to think about the impact that what you make has into the world. So, if you make a product that doesn't use any energy, like a piece of furniture or a shoe, the biggest ball of your impact is going to be into the material that you choose and the supply chain, like what we just discussed. If you're making a car, then it's probably going to be in the design of your car that you're going to look at. So already kind of think about your product or your services and the impact that it has. Then the second one is think about your business model. It's not only, you can really innovate in business model. We are seeing, obviously Reclaim program is an interesting business model. There are also, rental or sharing economy. We know these, but all of these are pretty impactful and can have significant reduced environmental impact. And then actually the last piece for me is like something that is so important in how these kind of circular system and recycling system works is the infrastructure. So, you probably heard we are in recycling crisis right now. There's not enough infrastructure in the US as well as in the world to recycle all of the things that we make. There is a lot of business opportunity there right now, a lot of funding into, building the infrastructure that support this circularity. So thinking at a bigger scale is another advice that I would give.
And I'd follow on that. I think really interesting point that Zoe just made around the reverse supply chain opportunity, right? Where there's a lot of goods being made that needs to be recycled. And I think we should differentiate between making recyclable products and recycling products, because a lot of companies, a lot of brands right now are putting out products that are recyclable, but you can't throw them in a blue bin and hope that they're going to be recycled. I think most people would be aghast to know where those blue bins really go, right? The majority of them go to dumps. And so there's a problem currently, a huge gap in the actual supply, the demand side for recycled materials. And that's why companies have responsibility to build a market and a reverse supply chain for the products they put out, right? So to actually be able to take back the products that they make, disassemble, and downcycle to other supply chain partners. And I hope we'll see more of that. I don't think we're seeing a lot of it right now. ThreadUp is a great example in our world of a company that takes back clothes and then refurbishes them and sells them. It's essentially a thrift shop, right? But that model only works for clothes that are resellable. And so what do you do when the product has run its life? And I think that's something that needs to be moved towards. But the other part of the life cycle, the one where I spend a lot of my time and where Hilos is really built, is for on-demand manufacturing. There is a huge amount of overproduction and waste. And rather than think about ways to take this overproduced quantity of goods and recycle them, we want to solve that problem far upstream. And that's where new technologies like on-demand manufacturing, additive manufacturing can allow for us to make a product on demand. So I think just to give you an understanding of how serious the problem is, 24 billion shoes are made every year. and 1 out of 5 goes straight to the landfill. 20%. That's 20% of volume of all the time and money we as a society are spending to just fill a landfill. And with apparel, it's even more. It's 30%. So there's a huge amount of overproduction. You talk to anyone in the food industry, they'll tell you more numbers that are even more shocking. We spend a lot of resources as a society overproducing and not efficiently meeting demand. And as a result, there's a huge waste crisis. And so we can talk downstream about what to do with something once it's been used or not used, but you can also attack the problem upstream by preventing such production from the outset and leveraging technologies like what Autodesk is here for, right? 3D CAD, additive manufacturing, tool-free manufacturing. We can get much closer to making something the moment someone needs it, where they need it, how they need it. And that's the efficient world that we live in when we look at a screen. And that's the efficient world we need to move towards when it comes to consumer durables.
It seems like there would be a very strong profit motive to be doing this. The economist in me is like screaming right now. So, I mean,
well, who doesn't want to sell their product twice, right?
Yeah, well, and it just doesn't make sense that there's no money to be made when you put something in a landfill, right?
Absolutely. Well, so
you actually pay usually to put it in landfills.
Yeah, you're losing money. I mean, Hallie, I'm with you. My background is also I went to grad school for economics. That was one of the things that really stirred me. And it was really, I mean, we're logical people. We look at this incredible supply chain that's really a legacy of World War II. We make on a World War II production quota style supply chain where we're really good at making 10,000 at a time, 20,000 at a time, but it's not efficiently scaled to connect demand and supply, right? It's efficiently scaled to win a war. And that's now how we're making goods. And so it's shocking, and we need to move past that.
Yeah, just shocking. So, and maybe we just kind of answered that question, but what do you see as being the biggest barriers or challenges to this shift happening? Why aren't we efficient?
I can go ahead, Elias.
No, go ahead. I didn't want to interrupt you.
No, I think profitable companies that don't want to change. I think it's one of the biggest barriers because we need large scale changes. Right now there are not a lot of financial incentives for big corporation to jump on this train. But I'm hopeful about how regulation is going to help us meet the two ends, because there is also a big pool of maybe smaller organizations, some corporate that are really invested, and then a generation of students like yours that want to see the models and the company that they will be working with changing. And so I think in between kind of that consumer and this demand that is coming from now investor, employees, next generation, the mixed with regulation is really going to start pushing kind of the larger economy of scale from fossil fuel being so cheap that makes all of our commodities so cheap, including plastic, to something that makes more sense for the world that we want to live in.
Yeah, and I have to say it's the weight of legacy. I mean, and this is why we should all be very excited about 2020 in a way. There's a silver lining to 2020 because we have never been more open to change in generations as a society, as a world. And I think we're beginning to question a lot of the weight of legacy. Before founding Hilos, I worked at a company where we were working with some of the biggest brands, Fortune 100 brands like Caterpillar, Estee Lauder, BMW. And these were all companies trying to change the way that they were doing business to become more socially responsible and more sustainable and more relevant. And I saw that it was all very service level. They were brilliant people with a huge amount of capital and access behind them, but they couldn't fundamentally change the way that they made and delivered goods. The weight of their supply chain made it so that all their focus was on, downstream aftermarket messaging and recruiting tactics, right? It was like the partnership with ThreadUp is a great example. We can take back clothes once they're done, but we can't make clothes fundamentally differently, right? And that's because there's a huge amount of inertia and a huge commitment to current supply chain. So the way I think that we can really move the needle is to make it as easy as possible for these old companies these legacy industries to move to completely new forms of manufacturing, to complete end-to-end solutions for them. And there's a huge market for that. That's why Hilos is built around footwear right now. There's a market to make it very easy for legacy companies to move to new forms of manufacturing and supply chain and to create completely circular product on demand. And I think that there's a huge amount of possibilities. We've seen a lot of companies like Velo 3D is a factory in the box around, they started with electric bicycles, right? And they're going to change the way that industry and then others are. So there's a focus on specific applications and specific markets that each one will disrupt that specific market. And at that point, will reach a tipping point where, like, the economist in you will say, well, there's not only a competitive advantage for this new technology, in order to be relevant in the future, they need to move towards this form of production because they're so much more agile. There's so much more, they don't have the weight or the liabilities of legacy. And so I think that's the situation we're in now, where we're seeing promising applications focused on specific industries bubbling up in the market. There's a huge opportunity. And as those accelerate, it's going to reach a tipping point where everyone is going to have to get behind them to stay relevant. Brands are going to have to adopt those kinds of supply chains to stay relevant. In the meanwhile, there's so much that we as consumers and that the government and regulatory bodies can do to accelerate that through really providing the actual real cost of these old supply chains to carry through to the goods that we enjoy.
Yeah, two things that kind of strike me is the idea of right pricing. And I think a lot of people are talking about that right now with the inflationary pressures, not necessarily being a bad thing because they're helping us bring prices up to the levels that it really probably should be at. The other thought that's kind of in my head as you're talking about this is this just a conversation that's happening within the United States, or do you feel like this is a global conversation right now in terms of some of these approaches?
It's certainly global from where I sit. I've had some great conversations with partners in Europe and in Japan, and the circular economy is as top of mind in Europe and in Japan, almost as it is in America. We're certainly a leader. The US is leading that conversation right now, and I think we should feel, not from a regulatory standpoint. From a regulatory standpoint, you could argue that the EU is, but from a cultural standpoint, we're pretty advanced. But there's a large and kind of grassroots evolution that I think when we begin a conversation in this country, it very quickly carries over into markets that we transact with. Japan and Europe are right there with us, and I can't speak for South and East Asia beyond that, but I do think that there's a huge cultural resonance to a more sustainable and circular form of product.
I'm going to totally agree with the global aspect of it. I will say that for a while, I thought the US had a kind of an advantage from an innovative perspective. I'm definitely seeing that being taken by Europe. And culturally, I think that Europe is way more advanced. We're still seeing that, it's just more in the habit that Americans, and that is being proven into the numbers in terms of just global footprint of, an American lifestyle versus a European lifestyle versus a Japanese. And then definitely on the regulatory side, Europe is way in advance with, circular economy action plan already set in place that are putting mandates on manufacturers being on not only European, but anyone that wants to sell in Europe will have to comply with this regulation. I'm also seeing the waves coming from Asia. I'm actually later today talking to India about these topics, but something particularly this waste crisis that you mentioned, Elias, is really shaking up Asia since they've been receiving our waste for so many years, and now it's being sent to Southeast Asia and making it a problem there as well. So that is also reaching out there. So it's definitely a global, and it's really important that we actually consider these kind of the global south into that conversation, because most of the growth in the next decade is going to come there. The next buildings are all going to be, we're talking about Africa being, we're going to double its floor plans in terms of constructions. The demand for consumer goods product and electronics is booming in Asia and is going to continue doing it. So we definitely, I believe that we might end up plateauing in the US and in Europe, and we should be spending more focus into kind of this global south and on putting the infrastructure so that they can directly leapfrog to, circular and clean solutions from the get-go.
That's a great point. I love the leapfrog analogy. It's like how we invested so much in landlines, and countries that were late to the telephone game went straight to cell phones. And so hopefully that same kind of pattern and the efficiencies captured can be applied in the global south.
Yeah, so true. Okay, Elias, I'm going to have you answer this one first. Pressures towards sustainability are reaching a tipping point. How can businesses accelerate their sustainability transformation while still finding new opportunities and avenues for growth?
Well, I'll tell you what I'm seeing first, and then a few things that I think are being missed. I think every retail brand that I speak to today has a commitment to get to net zero by 2030 and wants to be net positive by 2035. So they're going even farther and faster than our public sector commitments are under the Paris Climate Accords. And that's fantastic. What I am seeing in terms of the plans to get there is a combination of buying offsets and trying to push supply chains to become a little bit more regenerative, or to eliminate plastics from packaging, things like that. So very much tried and true. I think what I would want to encourage any brand or company to be more, I think, adventurous around is integrating new forms of designing, developing, and manufacturing their products and services into their core sustainability platforms and strategies. Because, like Zoe said at the very beginning of this panel, it really starts with how you design and then how you manufacture a product. How we make things has an incredible impact on not just the social inequalities and cultural fabric of our country. How and where we make things impacts our environment to I think global manufacturing at this point. Just fashion retail is the fourth most polluting industry in the world. So you can imagine how this extrapolates across many industries. The one thing that I'm seeing glimmers of hope at a few kind of, I think, positive steps taken have been around industries or players, very large players within industries, collaborating around sustainable goals. And there's been a few bright spots when you have collaborations between established brands and startups that have been able to together really move the needle within an industry while also showcasing a new path forward. And so that's where I see the industry evolving. I mentioned Adidas and Allbirds. Despite their short sustainability report, it's a great example of relative startup and an established company and industry teaming up together. I mentioned Reformation and ThreadUp. This is largely in fashion retail, but it's happening across the board. There's incredible material companies. I'll mention Algenesis, that's building essentially plastics replacing algae-made products. There's a few others that are adopting new packaging solutions built from mycelium. So there's incredible startups that are either innovating on the material, design, or manufacturing fronts. And the more that focused companies can work closely with them at the inception of new product lines, the faster that change is going to accelerate.
Yeah, I'm just gonna add. I mean, yes, completely. This increased not interest, but commitment to sustainability across the board. At Autodesk is for our biggest account. It's over 92% of biggest account that have publicly stated sustainability goals. And to your point, a lot of them are making a net zero commitment that they're filling up with offset, which I think can have its own drawbacks, and definitely we can debate a little bit about the value of offset. And what I would say is that there is also a more and more scrutiny around these claims and this commitment. And because you mentioned earlier that there is more and more ESG funding available, investors are looking more closely to company and kind of claim for greenwashing. So that's kind of something where, to be careful there. I think you mentioned something. I really want to respond to you also on kind of this idea of like collaboration between corporation and startup. Another one is that I'm seeing is starting more and more coalition at a pre-competitive level. So it's actually two large corporations. So, I was thinking about the Next Generation Cup Challenge, or right now there is one around plastic bags, and it's led by Walmart, Target, and, you name them, trying to reinvent what is the next generation of plastic bag. And I really do agree with you, Elias, that we starting seeing this conversation happen at a pre-competitive level, for me, seems more of a commitment than saying, I'm going to buy carbon credit somewhere else to make me look better, So, and I also think that if we really want to achieve true circularity, we're going to need not only this collaboration at pre-competitive level, but we're going to start needing collaboration across industries. And this is going to be the hardest, meaning how can the waste from your apparel industry can end up in my automotive industry and then go into, maybe another industry. And I have a couple of examples. Like we have a company that takes recycled carpets and turn it into a thermoplastic that Fords use into their cars. So we are seeing a little bit that, but I think because of the inherent principle of that recycled itself is downcycling, we need to start thinking about cross-industry collaboration so that this downcycle can become the upcycle of another industry. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I love that. And I think that that's something where, first off, we should give a shout out to Oregon as I think really showcasing some great examples of industry collaboration and being home to a lot of incredible brands, as well as manufacturing technologies and design technologies that are all trying to solve this problem together, right? So you have incredible, Oregon and Portland in particular is the capital of a lot of sports and athletic brands, but you also have Autodesk here, you've got HP, you've got 3D Systems, you've got a lot of incredible technology providers as well as these brands, and the partnership, it's a very fertile partnership field. So I think that we should, especially because we've got Oregon Tech here moderating, we should recognize and call out a little bit about what's special about Oregon, because I agree. I think the era of high walls behind which a single company innovated is long gone. We're in an era of collaboration. It's networks, not hierarchies. It's winning together or not at all. And if we saw anything from the last year, it's that the consequences of not doing so are pretty dire.
Yeah,
and maybe just to come back to the question, sorry, Hallie, back to the question in terms of how company can start, like for me, something that I say, it's like you cannot optimize what you don't measure. So please go and start by doing a baseline assessment of what is your environmental impact. You can do that with third party, you can do that with online tool, but really understand what is your company impact and then go and optimize over that.
I was just going to say, it's really exciting to hear about this tipping point among corporations to think about how that's happening and investors paying attention. But it also feels like it's trickling down to the consumer level. My news feed is just one constant article after another. There's a new, or maybe it's a renewed sense of urgency around these issues. And I don't know if that's something that you would agree with, and how all of those different levels work together: the government, the corporation, the investor, and the consumer to really make this happen.
Very much. And I would say for me, the tipping point actually came with consumers. We've been seeing corporation getting involved with sustainability. Regulation has always been here, but really the push of consumers that are demanding that companies have a better impact into the world or reduce the environmental impact of their product is really becoming prominent. And, even though for a long time we had data that said things like consumer will be ready to pay more if their product were sustainable, now we actually have it's more than just thoughts. We have data that shows that they are actually putting money behind their thoughts. And I would say beyond just kind of their lifestyle, what big change that I'm seeing is that this kind of consumer demand is transforming into activisms. And I'm seeing more and more. I mean, just 2 years ago, I had a keynote where I asked people who Greta Thunberg is, and no one knew. And now there is no one into the planet that doesn't know who Greta Thunberg is. And she led amazing activist, campaign. And we are seeing like Extinction Rebellion that is, entering into large banks, that are stopping planes, and corporations are paying attention. Greta Thunberg putting shame on plane has made the Swedish airline market drop by 7% that year. Like they are paying attention of what these activists are starting to say. And that, I think, has significantly changed how companies are addressing, saying, oh, well, it's a way of getting more customer versus, oh, I'm going to lose my customer if I don't do that.
Yeah, no, I think I completely agree with Zoe. I'm sorry, you should have found two people who disagree more. We're making it dull for you. But this really, in my opinion, started from the customer, from the consumer angle, and that's when people started paying attention. There was no altruistic, board of directors meeting where they all felt like they needed to become better in terms of environmental footprint. This is from the ground up. This is from consumers up to the companies and up to their governments that represent them. And so I think that this is one where we've seen activism and we've seen a more conscious, buy less, buy quality, buy sustainable form of purchasing behavior drive really transformation across these industries. And so to the degree that that can be accelerated through demanding more transparency and I think more robust accounting will only accelerate that kind of transition.
Yeah, it's a really powerful message because I think oftentimes we feel like we're just one person and we can't possibly make a difference. But if you put it within the context of it has made a difference, if you look at it over the last decade or whatever it might be, then I think there's.
And ask yourself, you're not only a consumer, you are an employee. And I can tell you, at least at Autodesk, we pay attention. We pay attention at what our employees have to say, and we know that 90% of them, join Autodesk because of what we do for sustainability. And so, I always say, like, put yourself, like, as a consumer, buy better and less, and but as an employee, request your boss, request your CEO to do something about it, and soon the CEO will be someone that cared about it since the beginning. And, so I'm also very hopeful of this new generation that has sustainability so embedded into what they want to do. And they are going to, wipe over the entire workforce soon. And that makes me feel very optimistic about how to continue pushing that topic.
Absolutely. Okay, so how is additive manufacturing changing the way we think about prototyping and manufacturing? And how is it fueling the move of distributed manufacturing operations away from urban centers?
Well, I'm happy to talk a little bit about how it's changing manufacturing. I think a lot of people have focused on how it's changing prototyping since that's where it's lived for the last 10 years. But some really exciting things are happening in the field of additive manufacturing, where for the first time, the materials, the hardware, and the software are finally evolved and matured enough that you can move to end-use production. And this is really exciting because this is tool-free manufacturing. So generally, the reason why we overproduce today is because there's high tooling costs, and you have to make up those high tooling costs by having low part costs spread out over a long stream of parts. So if it costs me $1 million to make a mold, then I need to make 1 million keychains with that mold in order to get to $1 a keychain price, right? But when you have tool-free manufacturing through additive, you're able to have the same cost for your first part as for your 100th part. And so it provides a completely different sense of valuing how you're making something. And it really enables any product category that is low volume, high mix. So when you think of anything where there's a lot of different variants and it's not profitable or easy to make a lot of one thing, then this is where additive manufacturing is going to change the world of manufacturing. So I focus a lot on footwear and apparel and accessories. Those are all examples, but you can look at tools, you can look at outdoor gear, anything where there's where there's lots of styles and sizes, where there's a lot of variants and overall very low volumes within each variant. That's where additive manufacturing is going to make a huge transformation in how we make things first.
Yes, and I would just say, even just in a very simplistic way, 3D printing has a lot of environmental benefits. It also has drawbacks, and I think you mentioned some of them earlier, Elias, around, recyclability of material is one of them. But in general, I would just say it's transformational because it has the opportunity to significantly reduce the environmental impact of traditional manufacturing, and specifically the embodied impact per product. And the reason why is that you, by definition, use less material since you're going to print only what you need. You also produce less waste. Imagine taking a block of material, sculpting whatever you want. You create a lot of scrap and waste. And it also allows for more complex forms that may replace an assembly of multiple parts. And so you can maybe simplify your supply chain, simplify your inventory, and so forth. So just important, I think, to mention that additive manufacturing has environmental benefits in itself. I also think, I don't know, in your question, I don't believe that we're gonna have like 3D printing farm inside city centers, and we're gonna print everything that is around us. I think that what Elias said is really true, that now we have a mechanism to say, okay, when is it a good trade-off to use additive manufacturing versus injection molding? And injection molding has still a lot of advantage when you want to do really, really large scale. So I think it's important to recognize that. And where I'm seeing the shift happening, and it's pretty exciting, it's you leveraging additive manufacturing for more like repair and spare parts. I mentioned regulation coming in Europe. One of them is that some products are going to have to be repairable for 10 years after the point of sales. And imagine what it costs for a company to stock for 10 years spare part to repair your TV or your washing machine, versus if they just have a 3D printer and 9 years after you bought your thing, we can just 3D print that one part and then replace it. And we're starting seeing that. We work with a supplier from Heineken, and they started having 3D printer into their factory just to do to repair parts when they break, so that they don't stop their line for too long, and then also being able to produce this spare part or this tooling, as Elias mentioned too. Tooling is one of the most expensive parts of manufacturing today, and particularly mold making. And we are starting seeing leveraging additive manufacturing to either replace mold making or doing building some of the tooling that will be required for other, maybe more regular large-scale manufacturing, traditional.
Fantastic.
And I want to give an actual tangible example, because I think that's a really great point. How additive manufacturing is simplifying the actual production of parts and it reducing the environmental impact, right? So a traditional, I'm going to keep talking about shoes because I'm a shoe guy, but a traditional shoe, like this is a boot here, is made by actually cutting large amounts of leather, injection molding, and cutting different rubbers. And so you have lots of scraps, just like Zoe was saying. And then at the end of the day, through a highly manual process, you piece together, your boot and you ship it off. But when you use 3D printing, you're able to take all the different materials that would normally be glued and nailed together, and you're able to make them in one seamless platform like this, that has the comfort of an insole and rebound of an outsole. And so then you have a shoe like this that is able to be made not only without all the waste from scraps, but that has 85% reduction in water usage, that has a fraction of the chemical usage, right? So the actual environmental impact and material costs of the product are drastically reduced just because of this form of manufacturing, and not the amount of parts it's replacing, but the types of parts it's replacing. So I think it's a really important point, and hopefully that kind of drove through tangibly what that looks like from a product perspective.
That's fantastic. Okay, so as we wrap up, how about one last piece of advice from each of you for our students on, for those students who are intrigued and interested in exploring sustainable design more, what would you encourage them to do? Zoe, let's start with you.
Research. I think we gave so much good advice in this talk. I think Elias, from going and reading sustainability report to, looking into resources that are available from, circularity, things like the Ellen MacArthur Foundation is a great resource. Educate yourself. And as I said, if you decide to, embark in this journey, which I highly recommend, start by asking yourself what you do, what impact it has, make this baseline assessment, and then think about strategy to optimize from there.
I'm going to give the advice that someone much smarter than me gave to myself when we were starting out, and that's go to a toy store. And it's because there are so many interesting things you can learn just by looking at how toys are put together. There's actually a lot of interesting kind of mechanisms and forms of manufacturing. But in general, go to a toy store, go to a museum, look at pre-industrial forms of making and manufacturing. I think there's a lot, when you look at how to design something, look at how we created things before we moved into a mass manufacturing form of supply chain. And that's one of the things that was a huge solace to us, looking at pre-industrial, more craft-focused forms of making, and allowing that to tell you a little bit about how we can make things that are from one material, or how we can make things that can be disassembled or that naturally and organically move together. There's a huge amount of quality and value in how we did things before the age of the mass manufacturing. And I would encourage anyone who's looking at designing for circularity and designing sustainably to spend a lot of times museums and toy stores understanding how things were built earlier. I think that provides a fertile ground to move forward.
And to build on that, actually, I would always recommend anyone to go and visit your local waste management facility, MRF. I take designers there. I take our R&D team and researcher just for them to understand the scale of the challenge that we are facing. And it also tells you so much about, Elias said, it's not because you design something to be recyclable that it's going to be recycled. So go and see what's really happening there, so you will understand a lot of the complexity of how products are being handled at their end of life. And so that's another. Go to toy store and to a waste management facility and landfill if you can. It's fascinating as well.
I can't think
it's going to be a fun day at the end of it.
Yeah, this is fantastic. Thank you both so much. What a great hour. I appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you, Hallie. And thank you, Zoe.
Thank you, Elias. It's been really nice chatting with you.
I hope everyone watching is as inspired as I am. As fast as technology is growing today, so is the push for corporate responsibility. Consumers want options that fit their own ethical practices, and corporations are meeting that call by putting in place sustainability goals as part of their business models. Organizations have the ability to support their supply chain and manufacturing partners as they move forward with zero waste practices. You don't need to go it alone. Success can be found through partnering within the industry. On-demand manufacturing might be one of the most impactful practices coming about. This solution is helping established organizations make changes to their manufacturing process, moving away from traditional efficiency models. We are being shown that time again, real impact comes from working within the design phase to find not only material options, but also places within the supply chain where more sustainable practices can be found. Don't forget to register for the pitch presentation by our student competitors, live on June 25th, starting at 9 a.m. Thank you for joining us this week. If you missed a panel and would like a chance to view, they are available on the Invent Oregon YouTube channel. The programming today would not be possible without the generous support of our sponsors. The Lemelson Foundation, Business Oregon, Stoll Reeves, Oregon Community Foundation, the Ford Family Foundation, Horan Media Tech Advisors, Portland State University, Wells Fargo,